Saudi Arabia promised to build winter in mountains rising above the extremely hot desert, a 2.8-kilometer freshwater lake, 3 enormous dams holding back millions of cubic meters of water, artificial snow blanketing the peaks, ski slopes carved into virgin rock, luxury hotels suspended over the valleys, and the 2029 Asian Winter Games as the absolute, undeniable proof that geography itself could be engineered by human ambition. Then, the Games quietly moved to Kazakhstan. Weeks later, NEOM terminated the $4.7 billion construction package behind the primary lake of Trojana, with the critical infrastructure work only around 30% complete. So did Saudi Arabia simply lose to bad planning? Or did nature finally send the bill? The strangest, most fascinating part of this entire story is that the snow itself was never completely impossible. How exactly does an international sporting event move thousands of kilometers before a single athlete even arrives to compete? On the 5th of February 2026, the Olympic Council of Asia signed a legally binding contract for Almaty, Kazakhstan, to officially host the 2029 Asian Winter Games. This prestigious event was originally awarded to Saudi Arabia years prior. It was meticulously meant to be the global, spectacular debut of Trojana. It was designed to be the ultimate, indisputable statement that immense capital and advanced technology could completely override traditional geography. The official public announcement postponing the event in Saudi Arabia did not provide one single, specific underlying cause. No individual engineering failure was officially named. No financial crisis was openly declared, but the timing of this quiet relocation is absolutely impossible to ignore. We are currently living through a massive, unprecedented global tourism crisis. Megaprojects worldwide are currently bleeding capital, struggling immensely with inflating supply chain costs, and rapidly realizing that building luxury destinations is becoming aggressively, unsustainably expensive. The era of cheap global capital that fueled the initial, spectacular computer-generated imagery of the early 2020s has completely vanished. Investors and sovereign wealth funds are no longer simply satisfied with beautiful renders. They are actively demanding operational reality. Building a massive tourism destination during a global construction crunch is incredibly difficult, even in the most accessible locations. Building one that requires creating an entire season from absolute scratch in a remote mountain range elevates that difficulty to a massive systemic risk. When the Games disappeared, Trojana was actively confronting immense scheduling, construction, financial, and climatic pressure. Was Saudi Arabia merely buying more time to perfect its grand vision? Or had the strict international deadline finally exposed something deeper about the relationship between unlimited capital and unyielding climate? To truly understand why the Games left, we first have to thoroughly correct the absolute biggest misconception about Trojana. Here is the ultimate plot twist of the story. Trojana is not incredibly hot all year round. It is incredibly easy for the general public to imagine this mega project as a desperate, foolish attempt to freeze a flat expanse of sand, baking at 50 degrees Celsius in the middle of December. But that perspective is entirely, completely wrong. Trojana is located deep within the Jabal Al Lawz mountain range in the Tabuk province. These specific rocky peaks rise to about 2,600 meters above sea level. According to official historical data and information provided by NEOM, the winter temperatures in these high mountains genuinely drop below 0 degrees Celsius. Natural snow does actually fall here on certain days of the year. Saudi Arabia did not just throw a dart at a map and choose this specific location at random. Making artificial snow outdoors at this extreme altitude is not absolute science fiction. The mountains do genuinely get cold. But a mountain getting briefly cold occasionally is merely a weather event. A global, commercial ski destination requires something completely different. It requires a guaranteed, unshakable winter. The central, defining question, was never whether snow could physically exist in this specific location. The question was whether enough high-quality snow could be systematically guaranteed on the exact right slopes, during the exact right weeks, every single year without fail. Would you ever schedule an international sports competition involving thousands of athletes and international broadcasters around a few naturally cold weeks that might radically shift from one year to the next? Or would you absolutely need an industrial machine capable of manufacturing an entire reliable season? A remote mountain peak can become cold. A global ski destination needs something infinitely harder. It needs a winter that explicitly obeys a rigid commercial schedule. In the traditional historic alpine resorts of Europe or North America, nature and history provide much of the underlying operational system for absolutely free. The extreme natural elevation holds the cold effortlessly. The local atmosphere delivers the moisture reliably. The surrounding geography naturally traps the snow, creating a thick base that lasts for months. Trojana had the tall mountains. Almost everything else had to be forcefully made reliable through massive, unprecedented engineering. Winter in this specific region could not just be a passive season. Winter had to be a massive, interconnected, highly sensitive industrial machine. It requires a highly specific temperature window just to turn on the equipment. It requires precise humidity control to ensure the snow does not evaporate. It requires massive, unimaginable amounts of engineered freshwater. It requires immense power generation to run hundreds of heavy machines simultaneously. It requires artificial snow slopes, extensive transport networks carved into virgin rock, luxury hotels suspended in the air, and complex international competition infrastructure. And crucially, the most terrifying aspect of all, it required all of this to be designed, tested, perfected, and fully operational before a fixed, unmovable international deadline in 2029. Personally, this is exactly where Trojana completely stops looking ridiculous to skeptics and starts looking frighteningly, overwhelmingly difficult to engineers. None of its individual component technologies is actually impossible. Massive hydroelectric dams exist all over the world. Commercial snow machines operate globally in marginal climates. Luxury mountain resorts survive in challenging environments. The immense existential danger lies in requiring every single one of those highly complex technologies to work perfectly together in total synchronization on the exact same date. Cold is a highly unpredictable variable. Snow is heavily manufactured. Water is entirely engineered. The massive lake was a multi-billion-dollar construction package, but the sporting deadline was completely fixed. And the very first operational component of this incredibly fragile machine was controlled by something no human contractor could ever guarantee. Nature simply does not negotiate with human construction schedules. The first major, inescapable hurdle for Trojana was the extremely strict temperature window required for artificial snow production. To make high-quality artificial snow, you do not just need a standard weather thermometer to read 0 degrees. You have to carefully account for the wet bulb temperature. This is a highly specific scientific metric, combining both ambient heat and relative humidity. If the mountain air is too dry, the finely sprayed water simply evaporates into the atmosphere before it can ever freeze and hit the ground. If the air is too warm, the expensive pumped water just hits the ground as freezing rain, violently washing away whatever fragile snow base you have already managed to build. Furthermore, making artificial snow in marginal conditions is incredibly energy-intensive. You are operating heavy machinery at absolute maximum capacity, blasting pressurized water and compressed air into an atmosphere that is actively, aggressively trying to melt it. A 2025 scientific study published in Environmental Research Communications meticulously modeled the climate in this exact region and clearly revealed the fragile nature of this critical production window. At the highest elevations of the site, the climate model showed a median of about 68 skiable days under current climatic conditions. By the 2050s, that median dropped to about 57 days, with the statistical variation between individual years becoming much more extreme and highly unpredictable. At the lower mountain elevations, the current median of 52 days plummeted entirely to zero in the future model, even assuming maximum artificial snowmaking capacity was deployed. This is a scientific model, not a definitive prophecy of the absolute future, but it highlights the exact operational problem perfectly. Would any major luxury resort financially survive on a winter whose length changes drastically and unpredictably from one year to the next? What happens when professional athletes, international broadcasters, and high-paying luxury hotel reservations are all waiting anxiously for a cold front that simply refuses to sign a contract? Can an international sporting event ever be safely scheduled around a highly narrow climate window that refuses to behave predictably? Temperature was only the first expensive invoice. Snow absolutely needs water, and dry mountain deserts do not ever surrender water cheaply. The giant freshwater lake was originally designed to make Trojena look effortlessly natural, yet absolutely, unequivocally, almost nothing about creating it was natural. To guarantee enough snow for an international competition, you need a massive, hyper-reliable reservoir of water. But this specific lake was much more than just a simple, utilitarian snowmaking reservoir. It was heavily designed as a 2.8-kilometer freshwater marvel suspended in a rocky valley. It was explicitly meant to be the visual, emotional heart of Trojena. It was infrastructure, architecture, and luxury real estate, all perfectly combined into one massive, unprecedented engineering challenge. Consider the sheer, terrifying physics of this lake. You have to ensure the natural, porous bedrock is completely sealed so the precious water does not simply vanish deep into the earth. You have to meticulously account for extreme evaporation rates in the dry, windy mountain air. You have to constantly cycle the massive body of water to prevent stagnation. Creating this centerpiece required one of the most ambitious, complex construction contracts in the entire region. A massive $4.7 billion package was awarded to the prominent engineering firm WeBuild. This monumental package included building 3 enormous dams to hold the heavy water securely within the mountain valley. It included the excavation and sealing of the lake itself. It included laying the complex foundation for the bow, which was planned to be a massive architectural structure extending dramatically over the water. It required moving immense, unimaginable amounts of earth, crushing rock, and actively planning for a massive workforce of more than 1,000 direct and indirect laborers. This brings us right back to the brutal reality of the global tourism crisis. Infrastructure of this extreme magnitude requires incredible amounts of heavy capital, raw material, and human labor. Moving thousands of specialized workers into a remote, unforgiving mountain range, supplying them with housing, clean water, medical care, and massive heavy machinery, creates an astronomical, terrifying burn rate of cash. When the visual centerpiece of your entire winter destination requires one of its largest and most expensive construction contracts, is it still just a tourist attraction, or has it become critical infrastructure entirely too important to fail? And then, suddenly, NEOM officially terminated the contract. Let us look incredibly closely at the timeline, because the exact sequence of these events is highly crucial to understanding the deeper story. January 2024. The massive, historic contract is officially awarded. 3 huge dams, a 2.8-kilometer freshwater lake, the bow structure. Thousands of workers immediately mobilize to the remote mountain site. Heavy machinery begins moving earth. March 2026. The contract is abruptly terminated. On the 25th of March, 2026, WeBuild formally announced that NEOM had utilized a specific termination for convenience clause regarding the dams, the lake, and the bow. The legal termination became entirely effective just days later, on March 29. At the exact time of this sudden termination, WeBuild publicly stated that the physical work was only around 30% complete. They clearly noted there was approximately 2.8 billion euros of financial backlog value remaining on that specific terminated contract. It is extremely, critically important to state exactly what this means and what it definitely does not mean. This does not mean the entirety of the Trojena megaproject has been officially, permanently cancelled. The final architectural form of the destination or a potential future contractor could look very different. A termination for convenience often signals a major strategic redesign, a deliberate scaling back of initial ambition, or a harsh reassessment of capital priorities during a difficult era of high global construction costs. But an absolutely central construction package had been abruptly terminated, leaving the destination final physical scale, architectural design, and operational schedule highly, uncomfortably uncertain. Is this just a smart strategic redesign, or a very quiet retreat from an impossible deadline? If the massive freshwater lake was the visual and functional beating heart of Trojena, what exactly happens to the surrounding ecosystem when the package building that heart simply disappears? Saudi Arabia had already lost something much more visible than a single construction contract. It had already lost the primary international event meant to definitively prove the entire system actually worked. In 2022, the highly anticipated Asian Winter Games were boldly awarded to a place actively promising to manufacture the entire technological future of winter sport. In 2026, they quietly moved to a place where winter already existed. The stark, profound contrast between Trojena and Almaty is impossible to ignore. Trojena was an experimental resort under heavy construction. Its foundational winter infrastructure needed to be created entirely from nothing. Multiple highly complex, interlocking systems, including massive dams, artificial lakes, heavy snowmaking networks, and luxury real estate, needed to be flawlessly completed simultaneously. It faced a highly fixed, totally unforgiving international deadline. Almaty, Kazakhstan, already possesses a deep, natural winter climate. But more importantly, it has an entire economic and cultural ecosystem already built around winter. It has generations of local resort managers, ski instructors, and mountain engineers. It successfully co-hosted the massive Asian Winter Games in 2011. It has the fully operational Chimbulak ski resort. It has existing road networks thoroughly designed to handle heavy winter blizzards. Almaty did not need to desperately prove that winter could exist on its mountains. It already had the legacy. No official public explanation identified one single, specific cause for the sporting event leaving Saudi Arabia. But look at this scenario from the incredibly pragmatic perspective of global sports administration during a severe economic crisis. If Trojena merely needed a little more time to finish its hotels, why surrender the one global event specifically designed to loudly announce it to the world? Why manufacture a highly expensive, incredibly risky winter currently under heavy construction when Kazakhstan already had an authentic one that had been safely tested for generations? Kazakhstan did not arrive at the negotiating table with more ambitious computer-generated imagery. It did not promise the impossible. It arrived with something Saudi Arabia was still spending billions of dollars trying to engineer. It arrived with a totally proven, financially safe winter. Yet, calling the concept of Trojena entirely impossible would be just as misleading as calling it easy. Trojena was never just pure fantasy. It is very important to objectively acknowledge the actual engineering reality here. We know for an absolute fact that snowmaking technology definitely works. Beijing safely hosted the 2022 Winter Olympics, relying almost entirely on artificial snow, proving the industrial concept on a massive global stage. Massive concrete dams can absolutely be built in remote, extremely hostile locations. Mountain resorts can, and currently do, survive in highly marginal climates all over the world. Pumping heavy water uphill is a proven, standardized technology used in hydro storage globally. Saudi Arabia has immense capital, incredible engineering ambition, and a highly determined leadership. The factual reality that the WeBuild contract was terminated at 30% completion does not definitively prove that building a ski resort in the Jabal Al Lawz mountains is physically impossible. Saudi Arabia may absolutely still develop Trojena under a different physical scale, a completely different architectural design, or a highly extended, much more forgiving timeline. That is precisely why analyzing this project is so deeply, profoundly revealing. It did not simply collide with one impossible science fiction technology. It collided heavily with the immense, suffocating difficulty of making dozens of entirely possible technologies perfectly reliable at the exact same time, in the exact same place. If every single, isolated component of a massive megaproject is technically possible, why does the complete, interconnected system become so incredibly difficult to execute? Because enormous money and brilliant engineering can easily remove individual physical limits, but they absolutely cannot remove dependency. When you aggressively build a completely new ecosystem from absolute scratch, everything relies entirely on everything else. A slightly shorter natural cold window, more intense pressure forced upon the heavy snowmaking machines, more artificial snowmaking required, more precious water immediately required, more electrical power heavily demanded, more massive storage facilities needed. A delayed lake construction package? Significantly less time to safely test the critical water supply system. Less operational testing? Massively more operational risk before the international sporting competition begins. More systemic risk? Significantly higher insurance premiums and vastly higher daily operating costs. Higher operating costs? Another harsh financial review, another strategic architectural redesign, another long construction delay. This is exactly, precisely, how nature actively sends the final bill. Not through one massive, highly cinematic natural disaster, but through a constant, recurring financial cost attached to every single engineering dependency. The ancient mountain simply does not care about the human construction schedule, and the international games absolutely do not wait for the mountain. Nature never aggressively destroyed Trojena. It did not violently crack the massive concrete dams. It did not furiously bury the unfinished ski village in a sudden landslide. It did not spitefully cancel the Asian Winter Games in one dramatic, highly publicized moment of fury. It simply, quietly refused to become cheap, perfectly predictable, and obedient. Saudi Arabia may absolutely still build a ski destination on these very mountains. It may even build an incredibly extraordinary one that defies heavy expectations. The intense ambition firmly remains, and the financial resources are undeniably vast. But the incredible story of Trojena has already fully exposed the immense, unbridgeable difference between simply manufacturing snow and completely commanding an entire winter. Immense money can freely buy the best industrial machines in the world. It can easily move massive amounts of heavy water. It can aggressively reshape giant mountains. But geography is not just another disposable contractor you can simply hire or quietly terminate for convenience. And eventually, inevitably, nature always submits its final invoice. Would you confidently call a massive project technically possible if every single complex component must work perfectly at the exact same time? Is Trojena just a visionary project temporarily delayed by its own massive ambition? Or is it absolute proof that human money can safely buy snow but never truly own winter? The information regarding the 2029 Asian Winter Games, the WeBuild construction package termination, and the highly specific climate modeling studies are firmly rooted in publicly available announcements, official reports, and published scientific models as of early 2026. This investigative video explicitly explores the immense engineering and complex logistical challenges of the project based strictly on these established facts. The final development scale, exact design, and eventual completion timeline of Trojena heavily remains subject to change by NEOM. If you found this deep investigation into the extreme limits of human engineering and natural geography fascinating, make sure to thoroughly subscribe to the channel and turn on all notifications. Leave a thoughtful comment below answering the final critical question. Can immense money truly own a season? Or are we always just expensively renting it from nature? Let me know your exact thoughts, and I will see you in the next deep documentary.